Thank you very much, Program Director, Mr. Ekalabani. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Before I start with the task that I've been assigned with, I need to ensure that I make necessary acknowledgements of our dignitaries and our guests who are here today. I will start by acknowledging the Honorable Minister of the Public Service and Administration, Minister Yanda Dodo, the Honorable Minister of Finance, Minister Enoch Potopana, the Honorable Minister of Home Affairs, Minister Awolu Mzwaleni, the Honorable Deputy Minister of Public Service and Administration, Dr. Kana Hilani Macheke, the Honorable Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. David Masondo, the Director General of the Public Service and Administration, Ms. Yolisa Makasi, the Director General of the International Labour Organization, Mr. Johnny Musabunyana, who will be connecting with us electronically at a later stage when he has the opportunity to address the summit, the Director of the CCMA, Advocate Kamran Muhajana, the Executive Director of NETLEC, Ms. Lisa Sefton, the National Office Bearers of all our trade unions represented here today, the Vice Chairperson of the PSCDC from the Labour side, Ms. Casey Matume, the General Secretary of the PSCDC, Mr. Friki de Grey, members of the PSCDC Executive Committee and Council members, chairpersons and general secretaries of all our sector councils, that is the ELRC, the DPSSPC, the Public Health Bargaining Council, and the SSPC, value partners and leadership from our medical scheme, GEMS, and also our pension fund scheme, that is the GEPF, executive members from all the sectors, esteemed speakers in various professions, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. Colleagues, let me say a very good morning and a welcome to you all to this Public Service Summit on collective bargaining. Also allow me to convey on behalf of the Council to each and every one of you for devoting your time to be part of this important occasion. This, I understand, is a very busy time for everyone, particularly around this time of the year. And I know that most of you had to reorganize your diaries and also your schedules in order to be present here today and be part of our summit. Hence, we take your presence here very seriously and wish to ensure that the service that you are going to receive through the program is, as the program director has indicated, going to worth your while. Colleagues, the PSCDC has a very critical role to play, particularly in promoting labor peace in the public service, and also to ensure the effective coordination of its programs aligned to those of national imperatives. These roles are also embedded in the PSCDC mission statement, which is to promote sound labor relations through collective bargaining and dispute management, both locally and internationally. I would also like to mention, colleagues, that this year the PSCDC will be commemorating its 25th anniversary. Therefore, through all these opportunities and challenges that we may have experienced as the PSCDC over the past 25 years of our existence as a council, we have triumphed, I suppose, and we have also kept alive the vision of the PSCDC so that we can remain active and also relevant in the space that we operate in. It is further on this basis, colleagues, that we have convened this 4-day event in the form of a summit under the theme and accord, strengthening and defending centralized collective bargaining to advance economic development, social justice, a capable and developmental state, and labor peace, and the democratic workplace, close quote. Ladies and gentlemen, the summit aims at initiating an all-inclusive platform where diverse range of role players, as we'll see later on in the day, who are passionate about the subject of collective bargaining, in particular, to come and discuss and share knowledge that will facilitate the advancement, the protection, and also the workplace democratization, as well as the reinforcement and collective bargaining efforts that would earnestly safeguard economic, social development and social justice, and as I said, labor peace. We further believe as a PSCDC that the wealth of knowledge that our early speakers would bring, coupled together with their participation of those who will be engaging with the issues, particularly from the side of labor, including the state as an employer, will stimulate throughout the 4 days a robust discussion and also culminate in actionable and practical outcomes that will enable our future collective bargaining and its processes to become more efficient. As I'm about to conclude, please, I would like to encourage all delegates to make use of this platform to engage constructively as we go through the agenda as it will be tabled and also as it is contained in the program that is being distributed to you. It is also my hope that this summit will run smoothly and achieve all its intended objectives. Colleagues, without any further ado, let us get into the business of the day and make this summit a resounding success. As the chairperson of the PSCDC, I wish to thank each and every one of you for having attended this session, and also say in my own language, thank you.
Thank you very much, Imetimu, for the warm welcome to the delegates to the summit. Just to honor DG Workers, Mtali Kofi, self as the way for everything in Java, I will be in Java. And I have Mtali Kofi, who are getting safely, who are Holland Baki, and I am thank you very much for the warm welcome. But, ladies and gentlemen, we owe you an apology, a very humble apology for the late start. We needed to clear some other logistical issues so that we have our program running unhindered. We really would like to humbly apologize for that, but we will try by all means to make up for the lost time. Thank you so much. At this stage, may I invite the General Secretary of the PSCDC. Before that, there is a message of support from the ILO, but that message will be transmitted to this summit through the video recording. I hope it is ready. Those that are assisting us with technical support, may we please show that particular message. Thank you very much.
My name is Dr. John Msavenda, the Director of the ILO office in Pretoria, Western and Southern Africa. I come before you to give a message of support to the Public Service Coordinating Bargaining Council of South Africa. We join the multitudes who are congratulating PSCDC in organizing this historic public service summit on collective bargaining. With the birth of democracy and the promulgation of the Labor Relations Act of 1995, came a new dawn on how people in the world of work relate to each other, and the mechanisms for resolving conflict and disputes in the workplace. The PSCDC is therefore a creature of the new labor relations dispensation that came in 1995. It has put at its center the resolution of conflicts and disputes in the employment relationship within the public service. We therefore join many who congratulate PSCDC for the journey that they have traveled, but the longer journey that they still have to go. PSCDC has always put December agenda at its center, and it is for this relation and for this reason that the ILO is in a long-term relationship with the PSCDC. The road has not been easy. There have been intermittent conflicts, and some have even resulted in industrial action. But such is the nature of the labor market, and such is the nature of collective bargaining. The public service labor relations is taking place in a challenging context, the context of COVID. We are well aware that many who benefit from the public service bargaining council negotiation have been exposed, and some have unfortunately even passed on because of COVID. Many are frontline workers, whether they are nurses, teachers, they are police, they are all members of and benefit from the collective bargaining agreement facilitated by the PSCDC. As we therefore soldier to confront the challenge of COVID, we are aware that not only in South Africa, but many countries in the world have also found themselves in a difficult macroeconomic context, with declining revenues brought upon by the shutdowns and the lockdowns to contain the pandemic. The economy has suffered, jobs have suffered, and the fiscus has suffered. In this context, government has been expected to do much more, but much more with less resources. This has meant the space for collective bargaining and collective bargaining agreements has become much more difficult and much more contested, not just in South Africa, but throughout the world. It is against this background that we now have this public service summit, which we hope will bring the parties to collective bargaining in the public sector closer together and come out with a unit of purpose on how to ensure that we have harmony in the world of work in the public service. With this, I wish you a successful summit and successful deliberations. Goodbye.
Thank you very much for that message of support from the ILO. Let me also indicate that we are expecting a message of support from NetNet, which is one of our key stakeholders. But unfortunately, Mr. Njani was supposed to deliver the message of support on behalf of NetNet. He worked with us today due to the flight challenges, because he is based in Geneva, so he could not be with us today. But he has conveyed the message of support to the summit and wished the summit a success. We then will invite from the CCMA, Advocate Cameron Mohajani, to come and give us a message of support on behalf of the CCMA. A big round of applause.
Thank you, Program Director. As it is in the tradition of the CCMA, the chairperson of the PSAPC has acquitted herself sufficiently in terms of the protocol. So my submission on the protocols is hereby condoned. On behalf of the CCMA, we extend warm wishes to the delegates and participants of the Public Service Committee Summit on collective bargaining, hosted by the PSAPC. As this summit coincides with the celebration of the 25th year of the PSAPC existence, the Labour Relations Act, the CCMA, and the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, the CCMA wishes to congratulate the PSAPC and the entire Council on this momentous achievement. The theme of the summit, I quote, strengthening and defending centralized collective bargaining to advance economic development, social justice, a capable and developmental state, labor peace, and democratization of workplace, unquote, is in consonance with the purpose of the Labour Relations Act, and the CCMA is proud of its association with the PSAPC in pursuit of these principles and theme. Both the vision and mission of the PSAPC are founded on advancing the labor market and promoting sound labor relations through, amongst others, collective bargaining. It is enthralling to note that the CCMA and the PSAPC share the same values of integrity and accountability. The CCMA regards the PSAPC as a critical role player in the South African labor market, and can attest that since its inception, there has been stability and labor peace in the public service, which can be attributed to the Council's continuous commitment to promote sound labor relations through effective collective bargaining and dispute resolution. Through these efforts, the PSAPC as a sister to the CCMA to achieve social justice as mandated by the Labour Relations Act and the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. The Bargaining Council, as the accredited council of the CCMA, has assisted in the resolution of public sector disputes and as partners have incessant engagement addressing collective bargaining challenges and unearthing solutions to the benefit of the South African landscape. The CCMA remains committed and resolute in supporting the PSAPC and stakeholders to enhance peaceful, democratic, and economic public service. The effective centralized collective bargaining and its structures relies heavily on maintaining standards, terms and conditions of employment that strengthens and supports centralized collective bargaining, workplace democratization, and labor market stability to advance economic development. In conclusion, I wish you a successful collective bargaining summit. I hope that the objectives of the summit will be achieved. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nadine Mohajani. Ladies and gentlemen, let me, before I call upon the General Secretary of the PSAPC, just introduce yourselves, our choir, so that we know who they are, where they come from, and why they're invited here. This choir called Mzansi Choir was established in 2003, and it comprises of the youth, that comes from very humble beginnings, that come from the unprivileged background, and they are aged between 13 and 24 years of age. They have been invited here as part of our social responsibility as a PSCBC, but also to showcase their talent as we always prepare them for their participation nationally as well as internationally. So a big round of applause for our youth that's here. They will be entertaining us throughout the proceedings of the summit to make sure that we don't at any moment get into any tense moment. But I want to believe that having honored this invite, I've indicated that it's not the first time that we've gathered this way, but we always emerge, all of us, victorious and more united than we have come into the summit. And I want to believe that as we emerge from this summit, we are going to emerge more united. I don't hear a mantra from the leader. But I want to believe that we are going to emerge here. More united than we have come into this particular summit. Yes, thank you very much. We
Maybe Oliver does.
The PSCBC to come and give us the objective. Summit.
Where is she sitting? I don't know.
Thank you, Reverend Director. Minister, one of the asked if there's going to be any chanting, any singing. I did assure him that by the end of his speech, there'll be a lot of singing and a lot of chanting going on from the other side. So, Minister, bear with me on that one. Minister, Toto also allow me to waiver the protocol that has been observed by the chairperson. That would save me a whole page of announcing and pronouncing and going through that. But we do respect all of the support that is here. And we also acknowledge the support of the ministers, the cabinet colleagues of the Minister that is here today. We last saw them in 2010. We will see you again. And we are glad that you are part of our processes and you are here. But also allow the minister just to mention one of the other stakeholders, I think critical stakeholders in this process that is here as well. We've got the general secretaries and the chairpersons of the different sector councils present, which is part of us and part of our processes. We also have the principal officer of the GPF, Mr. Mabesa and his team that is here. To play a critical part in the conditions of service of our public servants. And we also have the vice chairperson of GEMS, Mr. Mbarasedi, who is here for who's going to be leading the GEMS delegation to this function, to this event. And then also important, we also have the CEO of the Peace Secretary, skilling and upskilling of our public service is an important task, and it's part that they should be part of this process as well. So with this few additional acknowledgements, let me then greet you in my home language, Sami Bonan. And in my mother's language, Moro, and in Granny's language, Moro, Umela, good morning. It gives me a great pleasure to be tasked in outlining the objectives of the summit to you today. In doing so, I believe it's important that we take one step back, that we consider our past performances, where we come from. If we don't appreciate our history, we are not going to understand our future. Labor relations within the public service has evolved over the last 25 years. Parties have managed to turn around a segregated-based employment practice that allowed the state to have different policies for employment for black people and white people, and colored people and Indian people. Policies that segregated men and women from one another. All of this changed through the PSCBC into a practice that gives equal recognition to to all employees within the state, irrespective of race or gender. Parties managed to redesign the remuneration system of government from a discriminative racial-based approach to a dispensation that acknowledges skills and qualification of employees irrespective of race, gender, or occupational class. Parties consolidated the different pension schemes that had differential conditions and benefits that was based again on race and gender and on geographical location into a single entity later to be called the GEPF, allowing for equitable pension benefits for all its employees without any discriminative restrictions. A pension fund that allows members a direct input into the benefit structure of the scheme. Parties concluded agreements to see the restructuring of the state, allowing for a significant transformation within departments and bringing about change in areas of service delivery to citizens. Parties signed a collective agreement on the establishment of the Government Employees Medical Scheme, GEMS, offering affordable health care to all of its public servants. For the first time, broadening access to free health care for all employees in salary levels 1 to 5. Parties through the Service Charter fully committed and recognized the constitutional obligation of the state to deliver services to the citizens. The Charter acknowledged the continued efforts of the state and public servants in building a developmental state that is inclined towards addressing the need of the majority of the population, particularly those that have been historically disadvantaged. We have a past that we could and should be proud of. Our legacy of social dialogue and engagement is an enduring outcome of our democratic struggle, which foundation defines the pillars of our open democracy and constitutional basis. The PSCC is a microcosm of our democratic outcome, which serves as a vital platform to resolve important economic and social issues, to encourage good governance and advance industrial peace and stability. It's important for us to consolidate the gains of this important institution and jealously guard the advantages that we've made. Without getting into the legal jargon, the PSCC is a statutory body registered in terms of the LRA. The PSCC is defined in the LRA in terms of who the parties to the Council. It even defines what is the legislative mandate for discussions or issues within the PSCC in itself. Part of that is to oversee all those matters that are regulated by uniform rules, norms, and standards that apply across the public service. That's a very broad mandate given to the PSCC. To also address those matters assigned to the state as employer in respect of the public service that are not assigned to the state as employer in any other sector, which even broadens the scope of the PSCC further. Through this, the legislator wanted to emphasize the importance of coordination and consolidation for collective bargaining, for issues of collective bargaining, entrenching the sacrosanct stand of centralized collective bargaining. To give effect to this, the PSCC did establish sector councils. We've got 4 sector councils: the Education Labour Relations Council, the Safety and Security Sector Bargaining Council, Public Health and Social Development Sector Bargaining Council, and the General Public Service Sectoral Bargaining Council. The designation of sector should however not influence the principles of centralized collective bargaining. The formation of the structures of collective bargaining should always augment centralized collective bargaining. In striving towards safeguarding the advancement of economic development and social justice to the working class within the public service, we need to acknowledge the impact of the class struggle amongst public servants. Parties need to address the rising concern around the concept of the missing middle class that purports to be growing within the public service, where employees find themselves either too poor or too rich to ensure the basic needs of his or her family is met. This summit is held at a critical time in the conceptualization of how we continue to build and strengthen the notion of democratization of the workplace, social dialogue, economic development, and greater peace. The non-implementation of Resolution 1 of 2018 placed the relationship under pressure and was construed by Labour as an attack on collective bargaining. The global pandemic and the further decline in the economy of the country, linked with systemic corruption, has placed new financial pressure on government. This also placed pressure on employees being exposed to the continuous increase in the cost of living without a baseline adjustment to their salaries. In this summit, we need to find those balances that would address the socio-economic challenges and to restore the relationship. Challenges of our relationship is not new. We've been in this relationship for 25 years. If you've been married for 25 years, you know that in a marriage there's not only one disagreement. There is disagreements that flows. I'm married 29 years. I think I still have a disagreement from my wedding day, that is still there, lingering with me. So it remains, it's there, it's factual. And in 2009, we've already under what we then called the Birchwood 1 agreement. We acknowledged that in 2009 we should endeavor to find a new beginning, a new era, an era of renewal and rebuilding of our partnership. We need to, during the sessions, be honest and do an assessment of our engagement over the last few years. Did we achieve a new era of rebuilding of the partnership? And if not, how do we ensure that we achieve this when we leave the summit? The agreement further requires from the PCC to create a framework in which centralized collective bargaining should be outlined, as well as the notes of the round and the linking with the same with the sectors. This protection of centralized collective bargaining and the importance of that was further entrenched in Resolution 6 of 2010, the Public Service Summit Declaration from 2010. Therefore, this summit, within the plenary sessions and commissions, needs to address the challenges of creating a framework to deal with issues of centralized collective bargaining and agreeing on the implementation of outstanding collective agreements. Specifically focusing on the implementation of the decisions within the 2010 Summit Agreement and the implementation of the agreements on the GHS and GEMS. Debate the areas around state-owned entities and agencies in a broader approach ensuring a more effective and efficient public service. Approaches to collective bargaining focusing on management processes and adjusting the cycle of negotiations in line with the budgetary provisions. Considering the professionalization of the public service through the implementation of the Public Service Charter and a commitment to the resourcing of the public service to allow public servants to effectively deliver services to the citizenry, this summit will have to focus on discussion about the right sizing of the public service and proper resourcing of the public service to enable them to deliver those services to the citizens. We need to create an ethos of service, a public service or a public servant that understands the importance of serving the people through the Barclay principles. We also need to engage in the fourth industrial revolution, find a mechanism not to utilize paper, find a mechanism to digitize our environment, and how that will benefit employees as well as public servants in itself. We need, and we will be looking at the review of the remuneration policy of the state and see how adequately we can address the challenges that arises from the, especially those in Resolution 5 of 2009. And then also recognizing the role of women, youth, and people with disabilities in the workplace. And need to do an assessment on the implementation of ILO Conventions 190 and 197, and in terms of the compliance of employment equity in the workplace in itself. This summit should refrain from dwelling into the past. We should take the learnings from our past and focus on how we better that in the future. We should refrain from entering into an agreement stating clauses like, we agree to not agree. This is detrimental and goes against the core principle of collective bargaining. We should guard against populating an agreement based on the quantity of words or the dialect of proper English that is being used, and rather have an agreement that brings about real change through being implementable. In closure, Minister, leadership of the trade unions, for all intents and purposes, this summit comes to an end today for the Secretariat. After this opening ceremony, we have done what we could to ensure a successful outcome. We brought parties to the proverbial water. How you engage or how you drink from this well of water is up to you as the parties. The attitude, the commitment, and the solution-seeking drive of parties will now determine the success of the summit and the future of centralized collective bargaining in the interest of the public service, the working class overall, and the citizens of this beautiful country.
Who would with me without her care? No one, no one. Our fathers, grandfathers, our heroes. Oh, mama, no poder, kuluma lebo koto.
Once more, a big round of applause. If it was not because of the, observing the protocol here, Minister, I would have showcased my talent as a side. I would have come to the stage and did a bit of dancing, but I'll do that next time. At this stage, we thank you very much, General Secretary, for outlining to us the objectives of why we are here at the summit and outlining all those objectives. At least it's very clear, I think, in our minds that even though I did not hear just that talking about us and them, and so on. While this summit together and clearly in your outlining of objectives, it was very clear. President, that we are not in the bargaining council. I want to believe. So the objectives are very clear. With the line of march from those objectives as to how we will proceed without necessarily getting into the bargaining mode in this particular summit. Thank you very much for outlining that to ourselves. As we at this stage invite to the podium the President of the House, President Mike Shingaile, who will then be giving us the address on behalf of the entire nation as represented here today. Mr. President.
The chairperson of the PCBC, Mr. Dimo, and the General Secretary of PCBC, Mr. Freddie Dubray, who was late in outlining the purpose of this summit, or the objective. was late because I was not able to change my mind about what I'm going to say. The leader of the employer delegation here, led by the Minister of Public Service and Administration, Mr. Ayanda Blodder, the leadership of the trade union movement in the public service across the affiliates, across the federations, and indeed the leadership of the federations found in the public service. The delegates to this summit and yourself, Program Director. Thank you for inviting us to have an input in this important summit. And before I deliver the message as prepared by my colleagues, we want to foreground our intention to this summit or through our input. That indeed we are interacting and dissecting the theme of the summit, which spells out the objective. But we're also speaking to the aspirations about the objective of this summit, but we're also speaking to the lived reality of today, especially because we have life that we're experiencing in Easter after the 28th of February 2022. That reality and that life also is in the context within which this summit is taking place. We state here that the practice of collective bargaining in the state as a whole has been one of the proudest achievements of the democratic South Africa, given where we come from in terms of the nature of the labor relations that existed within the apartheid state. In this regard, we can say that in the overall, the democratic state has been exemplary to other employers in the South African economy. Although as parties in the public sector, we know that our reality is not as it appears to the lay international observers. Despite the challenges that exist in our broader labor relations regime, in which millions of workers are unprotected across sectors of the economy, together with the social dialogue at the NAPLAC, South Africa's practice of collective bargaining has been admired internationally, especially in the public sector. Unfortunately, today we can all agree that this is no longer the case, and in fact, no one can pretend that we do not see or that there's no existence of an irony in the fact that in this 2022 Public Service Summit is convened under the theme that places the need to strengthen and defend centralized collective bargaining. When the South African government has just torn to shreds a collective bargaining agreement that it was already implemented. And now, an obvious question arises: against whom is this summit seeking to defend collective bargaining? Against whom is this summit seeks to defend collective bargaining? So as our point of departure, Chair, and indeed it must be also the point of departure for this 2022 Public Service Summit, we want to assert the fact that this event is taking place in radically different contexts with regard to the relationship between labor and government as an employer. Yes, we're not in the bargaining council, but in this room is labor and employer. This means that this summit may go down in history as having been just another wasted time and resources. And that's if government as an employer does not clarify
the status of its representatives of ministers and departments at the KCBC, especially when it comes to the negotiations on salaries and benefits that have fiscal implications. This matter must be clarified, and it must be clarified in writing, because in the courts, Treasury has distanced itself from the work of government's mandated team of ministers and the mandate that it was given to that team by the cabinet. Treasury distanced itself from that work. So we need clarity here. What is the status of the team of ministers that are mandated on behalf of government to do negotiations? Because Treasury distanced itself from that work. In fact, the Treasury even managed to persuade the courts that the 2018 collective bargaining agreement on salary was illicit. Secondly, and equally important, is the fact that in the wake of the outcome of the Appellate Labour Court last year, the Treasury made an undertaking to Parliament that the approach to future wage negotiations will be aligned with physical position and prevailing economic conditions. This basically means that going forward, once the Treasury had unilaterally imposed its own budget ceiling on the public service wage bill, salary negotiations at the KCBC will be rendered full-time. This also effectively means that the relevance and future of the KCBC as a viable forum for meaningful salary negotiation itself is at stake. You might have seen the last 25 years. Once this practice is the way to go, and KCBC as a forum that is viable, that has done its job for the past 24 years, 5 years, it will be relevant because matters of conditions of service will be decided unilaterally, not even with the mandating team, but unilaterally in Parliament. Treasury statement, okay, we are saying therefore that the PSBC will be at stake. So when we say that collective bargaining in the public service is under attack, we are exactly referring to this unprecedented posture reflected in the Treasury statement. So if in this summit the employer claims that it wants to work with labor in strengthening and defending centralized collective bargaining in the public service, then it must clarify the practical meaning of this statement by the Treasury. But as labor, we are firm in asserting that going forward, we expect to unveil the negotiations with employers' representatives that are fully mandated to enter into binding agreements that will be honored by the Treasury. We are here to defend collective bargaining in the public service to ensure that the outcomes of negotiations at the KCBC do not end up being vetoed by the Treasury. Going forward, clearly in the light of the unprecedented decision by government to walk away from the Council's agreement in 2020, this matter that we are raising would be the real test as to whether there is a commitment indeed on the part of the South African government to respect and adhere to the accepted international best practice on collective bargaining. We want to be clear, Chair, we cannot engage in salary negotiations with the employers' representatives that do not have a full mandate to enter into binding collective bargaining agreements. Therefore, if the employer is serious about strengthening and defending collective bargaining in the public service, then we expect that it will fully capacitate and mandate its representative going forward. For the program director, we wish that the Public Service Commission, as a constitutional entity, was adequately capacitated to play its rightful role in such forums to help strengthen the public service. And unfortunately, given the existing vacuum in this regard, we have been subjected to a narrative of falsehood, geared at justifying the singling out and scapegoating of the public servants in order to place the national burden of reducing the public debt on their shoulders. While big business is given tax cuts, government has unashamedly propagated some falsehood that have damaged the standing of the professionals in the public service in the eyes of the public. Initially, it claimed that the public service was bloated and therefore it needed to be reduced in size or in terms of the headcount. Once this claim was discredited by the fact that there were glaring vacancies that even members of the public can physically see for themselves, with the long queues in the frontline service such as home affairs, including overcrowded hospitals and classrooms, a small police force, etc. There was a shift to claim that the public servants were overly paid compared to workers in the private sector. Again, even this falsehood is easy to see if one would just order to compare the salary of nurses, of teachers, of doctors, engineers, and other professionals between the public and the private sector. If the employer continues to make this unfounded claim, then it must show us evidence comparing equivalent and not aggregate salaries of the entire private sector workforce, which includes some of the super exploited workers with professionals in the public service. We are told that the public service wage bill is too high, but we are yet to be told as to what the appropriate size of the wage bill is supposed to be. So we have to ask a question as to what is the targeted ratio in terms of the public service wage bill vis-a-vis government spending or GDP. Can we get an answer to this question in this summit, or does the employer even know the answer to this question? We have to pose these questions because after freezing the salaries of these professionals and the public servants in general over the rolling years in the medium term as intended, we want to hear from the employer as to what caliber and type of a kid of the public servant is expected subsequently. And equally important, what will be the quality of service delivered that will be experienced by the citizens after this austerity program has achieved its objectives? When departments will ultimately be forced to eliminate some of their important programs in order to reduce their budgetary baseline. In this connection, it is important for us to pass a clear message to the Treasury, in particular and government in general, that the public servants are not consumption in terms of the budget. Actually spending on public service and its personnel is an investment for sustainable economic growth and social cohesion. No successful developed economy or society has a weak and poorly funded public service and personnel. In fact, sustained investment in policing to reduce crime, in education and healthcare to raise productivity and life expectation actually accelerate economic growth and lead to improvements in the standard of living. And by contrast, reckless cuts on public service could produce unsustainable social, economic, and even political consequences. Therefore, the constitutionally guaranteed frontline public services such as education, policing, healthcare, and social protection and others are vital assets in the long-term performance of the economy. By their nature, these public services are labor-intensive and require sustained investment by the state in the education and training to build an adequate pipeline of professionals to ensure that such public servants are improved and sustained over time. Indeed, to sustain an acceptable standard of service delivery, this public service also requires decent pay for the professionals in front lines in order to retain their expertise after years of public investment and their experience. Program Director, we said at the outset that our point of departure was an appreciation of the fact that this summit is taking place in a new and actually bleak context for future collective bargaining in the public service. In the wake of the unprecedented decision by government to refuse to fulfill its commitments in 2020, in this regard, we must remind the summit that it's unfortunate, or this unfortunate decision was actually a culmination of what was already incrementally taking place over the years. For example, regarding the outcomes of the 2010 Public Service Summit and some of the subsequent resolutions of the PSCC that have not been implemented. Ironically, that the 2020 Public Service Summit also had a similar overarching notion of the developmental state in its scheme. And since its progressive outcomes that were geared at strengthening the public service were generally never implemented, then we have to wonder as to what is going to happen to the outcome of this summit, especially in the current context of government's dismissive attitude towards collective agreements. Let's highlight some of these outcomes to remind the summit that already at the 2010 Public Service Summit, parties had agreed. At the summit in 2010 in Durban, parties had agreed that the filling of all vacant-funded posts should be expedited in accordance with PSBC Resolution 1 of 2007, and to conduct an audit of all the funded and vacant posts, and these posts to be filled as a matter of urgency. That was a resolution in 2010 of a summit of this nature. Unfortunately, we know that instead of the public post to be filled, our service has been shrinking relative to the size of the population since that summit. This is a concern given the fact that the proportion of the poor who depends on public services has also been growing over the last decade. Number two, on public health, but a process of developing acceptable staffing norms and standards that are compatible to South Africa will take place, considering benchmarking internationally and taking into account location, socio-economic status, size of the population, and the burden of disease. Unfortunately, even those 18,500 healthcare workers that helped the country in the front line of the fight against COVID-19 are now having their contract being terminated province by province, against what this resolution of 2010 summit says about the staffing of the public health care. We had agreed in 2010 that a decent job is a job with benefits. This means that you can't have the democratic state itself casualizing labor. For example, the workers such as the teaching assistant and general assistant in the basic education and community health care workers in the public health care. We had agreed in 2010 to conduct a research study on the relevancy and effectiveness of the performance management and development system, PMDS, and other performance management system applicable in the public sector. That such a research study should include elements of team and organizational performance and productivity. Today, we're talking about doing away with that performance development system. Not doing the thing that the summit had agreed to do, but we are doing something contrary, as we have seen the papers of government here in this summit. We had agreed to expand occupational health services to make sure that the workplace is safer. And we are saying here, if the Department of Labor and Employment had developed adequate capacity and had enforced compliance, some of the lives lost in the public service as a result of the COVID-19 will still be with us today. That the development of an overall workplace environment improvement plan must take place. And finally, equally more important, that the PSBC resolutions must be respected and implemented by the parties, monitored by the DPSA in consultation with the PSBC. This was the resolutions and the outcome of the 2012 Public Service Summit. And these outcomes were subsequently translated into the resolution of the PSBC, Resolution 6 of 2010. But unfortunately, we are seeing a selective initiative to implement some of the outcomes. For example, the question of the review of the remuneration policy. In fact, we are also seeing attempts to reverse even some of the important achievements of collective bargaining in the public service, such as the Occupational Specific Dispensation, OSD. Ironically, the OSD arose out of government's own recognition that the public service was losing and unable to retain professionals due to the disparities in pay between the public service and the private sector. Hence, we have to ask whether the government has even thought about the implications of reversing all these gains on the state of the public service. In addition to the effects of the freezing of salaries, we vehemently reject this erosion of our gains, which will also lead to the further weakening of the public service itself. It is clear that these measures are merely motivated by the narrow fiscal consideration based on some abstract budgetary ratios that do not take into account the long-term damage that will be caused by the erosion of the capacity of the state to deliver public service to our people. It is indeed outrageous, Chair, that it is only the public servants under the KCBC, which comprises large contingents of frontline workers, against whom the Treasury has laid down a clearly stipulated plan to cut their wage bill. As for the other categories of personnel on the payroll of the government, be they politicians, be they judges, personnel of Chapter 9 institutions and agencies, no such wage cuts are stipulated by Treasury in its budget, despite the fact that they too are paid from the same National Revenue Fund. The fact that these wage cuts enjoyed by frontline public servants are rolled out despite daily exposure of corruption, wasteful and fruitless expenditure by elites in government, in addition to the bloated national and provincial cabinets, top-heavy agencies, and unnecessary numerous and ministerial advisors, unnecessary ministerial privileges, exceedingly generous medical insurance for politicians, etc. This austerity program is scandalous indeed, Chair. Madam Director, as we conclude our input, let's turn back to the theme of this summit in relation to the question of building a capable and developmental state. First of all, we insist that it is impossible to build a capable developmental state whilst at the same time you are breaking down the capabilities of the public service itself, which is the backbone of the state. The South African Constitution is very clear in mandating that the public administration must be developmental oriented. This means that the question of the size of the public service is not merely about the wage bill. It is also about the size of the public service vis-a-vis the size of the population that it serves. Taking into account this growth rate, it is about the skill composition of the public service personnel as well as the international acceptable standards in terms of the ratios of teachers to pupils, the police to personnel, to the population, staffing norms on clinicians in hospitals, wards and clinics, etc. And finally, it is about the mandate of the Constitution and the public policy objectives. And in our case, the public service must have the capacity to meet the obligation outlined in Section 27 of our Constitution. This is not an option or optional, but a constitutional induction to ensure that the public service works towards access to socio-economic rights. Public servants, as per Resolution 7 of 2015, must be assisted to access affordable housing so that they do not need to use their retirement funds in order to build houses when they have retired and they die without enjoying their houses. If the resolution in place today does not be implemented, we want a clear pathway when we leave this summit on this matter, because it has been long overdue and public servants are heavily indebted and are dying of stress, they are homeless while they are serving the public. Thank you very much. We wish this summit a very successful.
observation, which I think I must share with yourselves, which is a very important observation I made. That you are always here that music or song can unite a nation. I've seen that, and I think we are agreeing on this one. Because I've seen during the first rendition by Labour, all of us agree, both the state and Labour agree that as Labour. It's a very important observation. It's a very important observation that song has united us. That indeed, as both Labour and the state, as Labour, thank you very much, Labour. As I call upon our Honorable Deputy Minister of Public Service Administration, Dr. Chala Pilani Majake, to come and do the honor of introducing and presenting to us the Honorable Minister of Public Service Administration. DM, thank you very much. A big round of applause for our GM.
Good morning. We are Morris and Bonani, Matehari, Abushe, Minister, the summit is here. Let me begin by acknowledging in our midst, Minister of Public Service and Administration, Mayor Dojo, the Minister of Finance, Minister of Home Affairs, Minister Mutswaledi, the Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. David Masondo, Labour, those that are here, representatives thereof, the DGs, including DG of Public Service and Administration, the media that is here, senior management in public service, honorable guests, and all protocol observed. President Chimani, thank you for the presentation. Just speaking after you, one gets an idea that I'm really speaking after the load has been put down. But that load is to actually give a base for engagement as we begin this summit that we have actually waited so long for. With this theme, strengthening and defending centralized collective bargaining to advance economic development, social justice, a capable and developmental state, labor, peace, and democratization of the workplace. And I'm actually leading the theme with the belief that the intention in the development of this theme was a bona fide chairperson of the public service bargaining chamber, and not bona fide. It's based on the comments that we just got now about the theme. My task is simple, just to introduce the minister, as she will be presenting the keynote address. Who is the Minister of Public Service and Administration? I'm going to be reading out what has been prepared here so that we can all get to know who she is. Honorable Ayanda Dodo is the Minister of Public Service and Administration. She started to operate in this position from the 5th of March 2021. Prior to that appointment, Ayanda Dodlo was the Minister of State Security from the commencement of the 6th administration in June 2019. Before then, she served as the Minister of Public Service and Administration between 2018 and 2019. And then between 2017 and 2018, she served as Minister of Home Affairs and Minister of Communications mid-2017, before she served as the Minister of Home Affairs. She also served as a Deputy Minister for Public Service and Administration, a position she held from 2010 until March 2017. After serving as the Parliamentary Councillor to the President between 2009 and 2010, she has additionally made notable contribution to South Africa's role in global fora as an envoy to Open Democracy Partnership from 2011 to 2019. Honorable Ayanda Dodlo currently holds a master's in business administration, amongst a number of postgraduate qualifications in management development, business management, and executive development programs. She has held several senior positions in various institutions such as Telkom, Sportnet, Sanlam, and most notably, the Department of Community Safety as the head of department and as deputy head of the Directorate of Special Operations, that is Scorpions. Honorable Ayanda Dodlo was the Secretary General of Mkhonto Wesizwe Military Veterans Association from 2007. The same year, she joined the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress until 2012. She later served as the chairperson of the Legislation and Governance Subcommittee between 2015 and 2017. She was elected as the head of the youth section of the ANC for England and Northern Ireland in 1990 at the London Institute of Shipping, where she pursued her studies. Honorable Ayanda Dodlo remains a member of the African National Congress, which she actually joined from the years of her teens. Ladies and gentlemen, Minister Honorable Ayanda Dodlo, Member of Parliament, I thank you.
Amanda. Indeed, Comrade December. Amanda Nikas indeed. But I must say that I loved the earlier song that was started when the president of Nehru, who is also the deputy president of COSATU, came to the podium, because in Bela we meet here at a time where Singanama. So, thank you ever so much, Program Director. I would rise on the protocols that have already been established by speakers before me and welcome everybody for joining us at the summit held today up until Thursday. I would also just like to give recognition to my colleagues from the executive who have come to support us in this conference, in this summit. And I must indicate to Labour that on the first day that the minister was appointed as Minister of Finance, he kept on, he was just on my ear throughout. When are we having this Birchwood 3? When are we having Birchwood 3? So there it is, you have a minister who has the hearts and also the aspirations of labor in mind. I hope he does not make the mistake that I usually do when I speak and then I say, we as labor. Please remember, you are not part of labor. Program Director, government views the summit as a very important opportunity to build on the two summits, Birchwood 1 and Birchwood 2. This is why the summit is colloquially referred to as Birchwood 3. Our aim is to solicit each other's understanding on the different priorities and expectations and emerge with a balanced view of finding each other towards the mutually benefiting and also an end of labor peace. A labor professional, capacitated, ethical and developmental public service that is capable of delivering improved public services to the people of South Africa. Most importantly, it is our hope that having addressed these issues, this will allow us as partners to reboot and reset our relationship to a level where we have resorted, trust and strengthened our collective belief in the bargaining processes and in each other's commitments to a better system that can withstand any assault on it from any quarter imaginable. The theme of the summit, which is strengthening and defending centralized collective bargaining to advance economic development, social justice, a capable and developmental state, labor peace, and the democratization of the workplace, is a theme that I think in today's time becomes so much more important. The fact that trade unions and government as an employer could agree to the articulation of the above theme in itself an unambiguous demonstration of an unequivocal mutual commitment to the strengthening of social dialogue. This is in line with the President's call that he made as he delivered the 2022 State of the Nation Address for Social Contract, not as an end in itself, but as a means to promote inclusive economic growth, social justice, equitable distribution of the country's wealth, and the promotion of workplace peace and stability. According to the International Labour Organization, this type of social dialogue approach, as a response to a type of crisis we face as a country, is both efficient and more equitable as it protects the weaker segments of society through collective focus and collective wisdom. The need to protect the weakest in society, as contemplated by the International Labour Organization, resonates well with our government's commitment to foreground the philosophy of four equally important components of society, namely citizens, government, public service, and public servants in our approach to this summit. This is so because it is the citizens who elect a government. In turn, it is the government which sets up the public service, which appoints public servants through whom services are delivered to the citizen. All these components are in turn bound by the principles of equity, transparency, and affordability, and also included in that fairness. Furthermore, it is the government's role to ensure its policy choices serve to protect the often competing interests of all stakeholders. As parties to the PSCDC, we need to respond to the broader socio-economic realities facing the public service and also our country. These broader socio-economic realities include the sluggish economic growth, shrinking revenue, and high unemployment. Malfeasance, corruption, and COVID-19 exacerbated this already dire situation. All these factors, in turn, result in progressive decline in the social wage as well. The decline in revenue has led to a cabinet adopting measures aimed at containing the cost of public administration that include, among others, the management of the wage bill. And President of NEHAWU, I have always, ever since I was Deputy Minister, I became Minister of Public Service, and today I will repeat. there isn't a necessarily robust relationship between the number of public servants and the wage bill. I fully agree with the assertion that you made, because that which is said to be the bloating of the public service can be argued away with facts on the table. And I can give the example of the health sector, and also I can give examples of the peace and stability sector in government. But what I would also like to say, in a bit of a response to what the president of NEHAWU has said, that for the longest of time, it's almost 7 years that we as ministers have never had a salary raise. So please, as you pray tonight, pray for the ministers. The 1994 democratic breakthrough showed the possibilities that come with open discussions and honest dialogue. As government, we hold dear this belief that litigation should be the last resort, and matters must be discussed until we find an acceptable solution for all of us. It has been our experience that social dialogue always yields outcomes which are more progressive, inclusive, and acceptable than those outcomes that come as a result of an adversarial approach or process such as litigation. The Constitutional Court judgment has no winners, but we all come out of this poorer as we surrender our collective destiny to the courts instead of negotiating at the table, even if it took us many more years to find harmony. Trade unions are an integral part of government's efforts to address the triple challenges in transforming our country into a non-racial, non-sexist, and democratic order that guarantees rights of workers as envisaged in our Constitution. While all of us are enjoined to respect the decisions of the Constitutional Court in the above-mentioned matter, we cannot underestimate the trust deficit occasioned by the way the dispute between our trade union partners and us as employers was handled. Some analysts wrongly opined that the implications of the Constitutional Court decision are so far-reaching that they would annihilate the concept and practice of collective bargaining. Now, government disagrees with this. It disagrees with such an analysis because the right to collective bargaining is enshrined in Section 23 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, and which the Constitutional Court also emphasized on its importance. I am pleased to remind this gathering that despite the prevailing sense of mistrust occasioned by the unfortunate misunderstanding that occurred in the immediate past, parties were able to conclude the 2021-22 wage negotiations. Parties to the PSCBC must be commended for this resilience and continued confidence in social dialogue despite the difficulties they experienced during this period. But I must also agree with the President of NEHAWU that it is not only the issues that came out of the Constitutional Court that cemented a feeling of mistrust, but also our inability to follow up on resolutions of conflicts like this and ensure the implementation of those resolutions. The resilience should be harnessed and nurtured for purposes of creating a responsive, robust, and agile collective bargaining environment in the public service, and we look forward to the next round of negotiations. South Africa has made significant progress over the last 28 years to build a society that reflects the ambitions and values set out in the Constitution in 1994. We also saw the introduction of ambitious policy strategies which will come accompanied by a range of public sector legislative and policy reforms intended to ensure that the policies established would be implemented. These successful policies saw South Africa move through key policy moments from the Reconstruction and Development Program to the National Development Plan, which now stands as one of South Africa's policy blueprints for long-term socio-economic development. Despite the progress that can be noted and as reflected in the 25-year review, it remains indisputable that the achievement of the intentions of these policies and practical delivery against the medium-term strategic priorities established in line with them has been uneven. In 2011, the National Planning Commission's diagnostic report cited capabilities of the state as the deficit that stands a major and undermining factor for planning for South Africa's socio-economic progress. This sentiment is echoed by the 25-year review report of 2018, which argues that the capability of the state has come under question, particularly its agility and responsiveness to socio-economic challenges. This review goes further, stating that South African state is hamstrung by undercapacitated and inefficient institutional structures, lacking focus and prioritization to implement. Cabinet over the years has made a series of decisions aimed at addressing the capacity of the state. These have resulted into a number of initiatives, all of which were attempted to address this challenge. It is critical that these institutions or these initiatives are consolidated with the view to undertake a diagnostic assessment of the capacity of the state to respond to the developmental challenges and needs of our country. To address this, the DPSA is in the process to constitute a multidisciplinary team of experts to advise on the initiative to assess the capacity of the state and embark on a diagnostic audit. The inaugural workshop on the assessment of the state capacity will be hosted parallel to this summit tomorrow morning to define the scope and process to be followed. As part of efforts to realize the consolidation of the social wage through reliable and quality services, which is one of the government's priorities, the government caucus will, over the course of the summit, share detailed position papers for discussion. And the following will be submitted as policy, as position papers to summit. An equitable wage setting mechanism, understood and agreed upon with all partners, will ensure that wage settlements do not crowd out expenditure on other priority services, as mentioned above. The single wage setting mechanism should apply across the public sector for purposes of eliminating unjustifiable disparities that lead to job hopping, unnecessary competition between spheres of government and state institutions. This mechanism should therefore assist us to collectively implement reforms that will allow us over time to eliminate unjustifiable disparities in salaries and other conditions of service across the broader public sector. Critical to this is the review and integration of government's mandating structures and arrangements, job evaluation and grading, and the potential introduction of a multi-factor index to inform collective bargaining on cost of living adjustments. We must also consider ways in which we could revise the negotiations process to better align to the budget cycle. And this we have spoken about so many times before. And I think coming out of the summit, this is one of the most immediate deliverables that we should implement. And this will ensure that the cost of implementing collective agreements are factored into the budget. With this, I must say that we agree with the Minister of Finance that this must be implemented as speedily as we can. And on the remuneration policy, the factoring of collective agreements into the budget will be captured in a new remuneration policy which addresses some of the current challenges around OSDs, allowances, and other benefits that accrue to public servants. In this regard, the Department of Public Services Administration has commenced with a new personnel expenditure review. The outcome of this review will inform the development of this new remuneration policy for the public sector. And mind my words, it's public sector and not the public service. Because a PA in local government earns more than a PA in intergovernment. The personnel expenditure review will specifically focus on problematic areas such as the occupation-specific dispensation and consolidation of allowances. There will be a presentation on this matter later in the summit. Distinguished guests, you will recall that one of the priorities of the sixth administration is a commitment to build a capable, ethical, and developmental state. A key imperative of this is the professionalization of the public service. Professionalizing the public service has been elusive, despite that it has always been emphasized as key. The National Development Plan brought this into sharp focus where it stated that a developmental state needs to be capable. But that capability can only come about if the public service is professionalized and all fundamentals are in place. To ensure that when policy shifts or changes in systems are reviewed and changed, new concepts are adopted and new systems and processes are introduced in the operation of the public service, we need to ensure that all our stakeholders are in sync with our direction. To ensure that we move together, I have therefore directed the National School of Government to develop training and capacity building interventions targeted at union leaders and shop stewards in consultation with unions in the public sector. These interventions, which I hope our sector education and training authorities will have the appetite to fund, will also help us to spot and manage talent among shop stewards and union leaders for growth and leadership that our country needs and so desperately desires. This intervention will give lower level labor leaders an opportunity to upskill themselves to qualify for higher positions and promotions in the public service. It is only when we invest in our future that we stand a better chance of building a better life for our people. The Judicial Commission of State Inquiry into State Capture reports have demonstrated the systematic and deliberate weakening and hollowing of the state through the restructuring of its institutional capacity, strategic appointments and dismissal of key individuals, among others, as a result of state capture. These activities have compromised the ability of the state to function professionally and have had a far-reaching impact on the entire bureaucratic apparatus of the state to deliver services. The DPSA has been instructed to finalize the human resource development and management strategy for the public service as part of the professionalization to address the capacity and capability challenges that are currently inflicting essentially all departments and state institutions and at all levels. Initiatives are currently being rolled out to address the multiplicity of factors, including but not limited to the systematic corruption, poor skills at critical level, lack of accountability for wrongdoing, as well as factors such as our declining budget. The intervention of the DPSA is supposed to address the pockets of extreme excellence on the one side and extreme disorganization and dysfunctionality on the other. We need consistency that saw the response to the COVID-19 pandemic loaded all over the world. I call on organized labor to partner with us in providing the required level of support and specialization function to public entities that are struggling to build the required capacity and capability. The DPSA has produced several reports on diagnosis and recommendations that capacity issues in the human resource management area, that these include, amongst others, inadequate organization structures, high vacancy rates, as has been mentioned by the President of NAHARU, insufficient management of discipline, and lack of relevant academic qualifications. But it is also not only lack of relevant academic qualifications, but also lack of flexibility of our systems that make it impossible for us to hire those that do not possess the requisite qualification but are far above those in terms of skill and aptitude than those that hold the requisite paper qualification. Addressing these requires a strong partnership between government as employer and employee representatives. On the implementation of the Public Service Charter, the Public Service Charter is a response to the realization that services and manner in which they are delivered are not at the required level that our citizens expect. There is a need to improve public service delivery to citizens. The Public Service Charter seeks to address the key challenges of effective implementation of the Batho-Pele principles and living constitutional values. We therefore call upon organized labor to assist us with the following: a better understanding of the spirit and the aims of the Charter, monitoring that the requisite departmental governance structures are in place for improved program support to implementing units, that available mechanisms for service delivery improvement are fully effective and are properly monitored, that public servants and union members are disciplined enough to live up to the Charter, and that departmental leadership is adequate and those that undermine the spirit of the Charter are properly called to account. So the full and effective implementation of the Charter is critical in that its values also contribute to the fight against corruption and maladministration. On our part, as government, we have put in place several programs to fight this scourge. These programs are directed by the National Development Plan, aimed to reduce the levels of corruption by 2030, as informed by the National Anti-Corruption Strategy that is based on the values of integrity, transparency and accountability, the respect of the rule of law, and zero tolerance. My first language is Afrikaans, so I will continue to make these mistakes. A key part of this started in April 2021, when lifestyle audits became a compulsory function across the public service. Capacity building initiatives are being rolled out across the public service to institutionalize lifestyle audits to ensure that public servants are living within their means and their wealth, and that their wealth can be explained in line with their assets and their income. But what this summit also needs to do is that it must deliberate over the finalization of the government employee housing scheme and also the establishment of an entity that will see the stream of workers and the employer come alive. 2 weeks ago, the 14th and the 15th, the Department of Public Service and Administration hosted an indaba on the future of work in the public service. The indaba highlighted the need for the DPSA's regulations, policy framework, and directives to be reimagined to enhance youth representation, productivity, and performance within the public service. The public service has been found to be aging and not prepared for the future due to the lack of understanding of technological developments, the need to change current approaches to how work is delivered, and the organization of government as an institution that serves our people. The IDAB initiated the necessary conversations given the rapidity and the changing times and environment, and the need to be prepared for any potential abrupt disruption such as what was experienced with the COVID-19 pandemic. The IDAB resolved on a number of initiatives that would lead the public service to move closer to achieving the aims of the NDP, the AU's Agenda 2063 of Africa, and we want and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and we're already putting in place mechanisms to ensure that the resolutions of the IDAB are implemented, especially around one, the promoting innovation and new ways of thinking in the public service for positive disruptions in service delivery. And one of these issues, as I address colleagues in labor, is that of the implementation of the government employee housing scheme. because this scheme has the potential to drastically disrupt the financial services sector and ensure that there is more money that goes into the pockets of our employees. And this can be done with the reduction of interest that is paid on loans that are given by financial services institutions, and also on the what we pay monthly to insurance companies. Not installments. The person who's normally you are misleading me. Yes. Installments, it's an African person who was saying that. What do you pay monthly for insurance? Yes, yes. So that would reduce if we clearly articulate what we want out of this government employee housing scheme and its disruption to the public, to the financial services sector. Promoting access of young people into senior positions across the state as part of addressing the problem of an aging public service that serves a young population. This starts with reviewing public service systems and processes for effectiveness and also for efficiency. Number 3, embracing technology and putting in place mechanisms that encourage the adoption of technology in the design and delivery of new services. Number 4, reviewing regulations, norms, and standards that impede innovation and promote rigidity as well as gatekeeping instead of attracting and retaining the right talent and the best skills. Lastly, improving the forecasting ability of the state in pursuit of having a capable public service that is fit for purpose and that are responsive at all times to the needs of our people. The purpose of the Indaba was for us to reimagine a future public service that is welcoming to new entrants, accepting of diversity, responsive to the needs of the public, and agile enough to adapt to new realities by using emerging technologies. It gave us an opportunity to also reimagine appropriate training interventions and tools of trade that will enable us to move with the times while embracing and preparing for the future. Program Director, I am happy to report that we were able to achieve this aim. Furthermore, you will agree with us that COVID-19 has forced us to think differently about how we conduct government business. It is my hope that this summit will deliberate further on the future of work and the kind of future public service we would all like to build and agree on a partnership format that will deliver it. As I go towards conclusion, I want to remind all parties in attendance here today that one of the major hallmarks of our transition to democracy in 1994 was the realization of labor peace. Many of us today easily forget how fraught and violent our labor market regime was before 1994. On the one hand, we had labor as the driving machinery for liberties of freedom, safety and security. On the other, we had an employer that was advancing a system that was deemed a crime against humanity. And I call on all of us, therefore, as we're gathered here today, not to take for granted South Africa's labor market environment of today. It is our collective responsibility to defend it along the theme of the summit. We therefore have to safeguard and protect at all costs what we have achieved in the labor market since 1994. We need to build a new crop of young and energetic union leaders and shop stewards that understand the sacrifices that gave birth to this dispensation and can take it forward. But among the older ones, we also need to develop coaches, DG, and mentors that will chaperone the road towards excellence of those that we bring into the public service who are young. So the young and the old need to coexist, and each and everyone have a role in advancing the goals of the National Development Plan. I call on all of us to deliberate over these issues collectively and emerge from the summit with a very clear way forward and possible solutions to deal with the challenges that are facing the public service. And it is my belief that working together, side by side, will make sure that no one is left behind in building a social compact that is sustainable. The PSCBC is renowned for resilience and is a pioneer of social dialogue. I am certain that collectively we can achieve the goal of strengthening and defending centralized bargaining mechanism to advance the economic development, social justice, and a capable and developmental state, labor peace, and democratization of the workplace. And as such, DM, DG, members of the executive that are here with us today, we all have a responsibility to maintain labor peace and narrow the trust deficit. We need to implement all resolutions that will emerge from this conference, from this summit, and continuously monitor their implementation and take stock of progress and address the hindrances for appropriate interventions at all times. Masmumbaneni, let us work together. Around you.
Once more, a big round of applause for our minister. Indeed, let's thank our minister for that address. The line of march has been given, and certainly, as delegates to the summit, we sure we will follow on that line of march as determined by the minister, so that we achieve the objectives of this summit. As we come to the break for our lunch, may I humbly request that we observe the following decorum as we proceed to our lunch. As you are invited to lunch, we will request both the president and the general secretaries in the national leadership of trade unions to join our ministers and our deputy ministers and our DGs for lunch at the venue called Mashia. This is not to divide both labor and the workforce that is here in the delegates. It's just to manage time so that when the others are having lunch on the other side, the others will be having lunch on the other side. So the president, the general secretaries, the leadership of trade unions, ministers, deputy ministers, as well as the DGs present here. Your lunch will be served at a venue called Mashia. We have the ushers out there who will take you to your venue, while all of us as delegates will then go to the venue called Galeria, just as we move out here. This is just to try and manage time, so that we all back here. The time is 1:05. All of us at 2:05, 1 hour on the dot, we are back in this. The last announcement, the last announcement is that as we go out, at the exhibition center, we have the Department of Health present there to try and actually encourage all those that have not yet vaccinated to take the vaccine out there at the exhibition center. You are invited to lunch. Let's all meet here at 2:05. Thank you very much.
Yeah, but we went all together there.
Maybe do it Wednesday, but it's on Thursday, it's on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a